Hey everybody, Plushie here, and today I want to sort of start a new series called Banner Breakdowns, and usually these are going to be for rerun banners or NA banners because these are kind of revisits and simplified versions of my hot takes, and I will of course take all servants within the banner into consideration and sort of give you a fast rundown and my personal thoughts on how worth it the banner is to roll. Of course, we will start with the Arcade Collab Rerun banner because it is about to happen in less than 12 hours, and Draco is obviously a very exciting servant people really wanted to have back. So without further ado, let's get into today's banner breakdown of Arcade Collab. So of course, first we will talk about the SSR Spotlight servant of the banner, which is Draco. Draco is a single target boss killer slash farmer, and she is very polarizing because of her unique class. Now Draco belongs in the Beast class, and she is currently the only servant within that class, and she has a very interesting class advantage chart where she deals 1.5 times damage to all standard 7 classes, and still deals double damage to berserkers. And she also takes half damage from all standard 7 classes, including berserkers, which is of course extremely powerful. But the trade-off is that she deals half damage to all extra classes that aren't beasts, and she takes double damage from all extra classes that aren't beasts. So this class is extremely polarizing in the sense that she is super powerful against half of the classes and basically unusable against the other half. This polarizing design continues into her MP, where it actually does not have any additional effect other than its overcharge, where it deals extra damage against all servants of the standard 7 classes. This is obviously a very powerful anti-trait, arguably one of the best anti-traits in the entire game, but on the flip side, if you are not fighting against servants of these standard 7 classes, such as non-servants or just all extra class enemies in general, then this MP is extremely underwhelming, just a pure damage dealing MP. We have never seen this since year 1, so yeah. Very polarizing design overall, so you definitely want to pick your fights when using Draco. In terms of farming, when you combine Draco's skill 1 and skill 3, she essentially has a 3-turn 30% charge per turn effect. So she starts her second turn with 30 additional MP, and she starts her third turn with another additional 30 MP. So this kind of slow charge effect is really useful if you want to MP multiple times. However, she lacks any form of starting charge in her skill set, so if you are farming against nodes that want her to immediately MP on turn 1, then it might become an issue where you have to bring a lot of chargers just to allow her to immediately MP. However, this problem is mitigated if you are in an event that has a 50 MP starting charge CE. This is actually very well demonstrated in her current event, where the 90++ is a 131 node, but the event CE has a 50 MP starting charge, so she can farm it very easily without the help of plug suits. Her MP damage is also very competitive because in most cases the 90++ end boss with the highest HP target on wave 3 is going to be a servant that belongs within the standard 7 classes, so she almost has universal coverage in terms of farming. However, in some of the rare cases where the end boss is an extra class, then of course Draco is completely unusable. We have seen extra class end bosses before Draco existed, such as Jinako from Valentine's, as well as BB from the ReQT event, and after Draco, we also have seen a couple of extra class bosses within farming, such as Ilia Fist. I think there are 2 rotations that have extra classes, and of course the current ongoing Summer 6 rerun, where the added 90++ has Sitanai as the end boss. So Draco is not the end-all be-all option compared to other berserkers, because berserkers are only walled by foreigners, but Draco is walled by all extra classes. On top of that, her damage actually falls off pretty hard against end bosses that are of the standard 7 classes but are not servants, because once again, remember, her MP's anti-trait is only against servants. So a great example is going to be last year's Christmas event, where the 90++ node has a demon pillar as its end boss, and even with my super jacked up Draco, I actually still feel quite a bit of pressure in terms of my damage. It is lacking. Without a damage CE, she basically cannot kill the final wave very confidently. So her damage suddenly becomes very non-competitive compared to other Berserker options because of her general lack of self-steroids. If we don't consider her skill 3's anti-dragon and anti-Roman, then she only has a single 40% attack up. In terms of non-farming boss fight performance, Draco's great for any new player that really just want a strong carry to help them through the early stages of the game, because extra classes basically doesn't exist, or just anyone that has a less established roster. Maybe you have a lack of options in the single target boss killer department, or you don't have a lot of strong meta supports to keep your DPS alive. Draco can essentially take the job of any single target boss killer of the standard 7 class, except for Berserker, but at the same time she also counters Berserker defensively, which is a very valuable and rare class advantage to have. So she doesn't really need very strong supports to protect her in most cases, and of course she does respectable damage to all enemies of the standard 7 classes. And of course this also comes into play quite a bit in mixed class boss fights. As long as there's no extra class mixed within, Draco essentially has full class advantage against the entire fight, which is pretty broken as well. Her damage issue against non-servants that is pretty relevant in farming is kind of mitigated by the existence of the Roman command code. Draco's skill 3 gives her a 40% anti-Roman anti-trait as well as a 40% anti-dragon anti-trait. But during her event, you can actually get a 5-star command code for free that applies the Roman trait onto any enemy that is not debuff immune. So even though this is a little bit inconsistent for farming, this is pretty consistent for boss killing. She's essentially unusable against extra classes though, so you would never bring her against an extra class only boss fight. Like even my 120 fully maxed out Draco cannot deal with an extra class, and even against mixed class boss fights that have 2 to 3 extra class mixed in, she will have quite a bit of trouble against them. Draco also has great utility skills in her skill 3. She has ignore defense, buff removal resist, and debuff immunity. All of them are really valuable anti-gimmicks. So even in a more established account where you are using her with a more built arts team, her defensive class advantage doesn't come into play that often because arts teams are already very defensive. You don't really take a lot of hits. She's gonna feel like a berserker a lot of the times that cannot deal with extra classes. But because of this skill 3 having a lot of special anti-gimmick effects, she can still hold her own. Draco's triple buster deck, in my opinion, is usually a negative, especially if you run her in a standard arts team. You really want a card that can generate MP. Even though Draco has a lot of good tools to help her get her MP back, like high hit count single target arts MPs, as well as a passive 30 MP charge per turn effect when her skill 1 and skill 3 is combined, she definitely would still prefer, additional cards that can get her MP back instead of triple buster. So overall, I'm going to briefly list out Draco's pros and cons. Draco has a very powerful anti-trait MP that also has really good coverage, allowing her to do great damage for both farming and boss killing against servants of the standard 7 classes. She also has a relatively easy to loop MP with the 30 MP charge per turn effect. Especially for farming, this allows her to fit in quite a bit of multi-core setups. She is also just a great option for newer players or accounts that don't have a lot of options. Her very powerful class allows her to essentially fill the spot of any single target boss killer that belongs in the standard 7 classes other than Berserker. But once again, she also counters Berserker, so she doubles as kind of a mini Foreigner. So she has really good coverage, and she can deal with a lot of boss fights and also excel in mixed class boss fights that doesn't contain any extra classes. Draco, also in a more established account with high-end, very defensive arts teams, can still shine because of her scalable anti-servant MP, as well as her skill 3 that contains a bunch of anti-gimmick effects such as defense ignore, buffer more resist, as well as debuff immunity. So Draco is just super strong in boss fights as long as she doesn't run into extra classes. And here is when we get into her cons. She is essentially unusable against extra class enemies, and even if it's a mixed class boss fight, as long as there's 1 to 2 relatively powerful extra class enemies, it can make the entire fight extremely tough if you don't have backup. Draco also has relatively underwhelming farming damage even against enemies of the standard 7 classes that are not servants. However, this is quite rare, so this is not that big of an issue as of now. She also has a bit of a hard time firing off her MP because of her lack of batteries, so in certain min-turn or farming comps, her team building is a little bit more restrictive, but as long as there's a MP starting charge C involved, this is a non-issue. She also has a triple buster deck, which is also a small negative because of her primarily arts and MP spamming playstyle. Sometimes I do find myself just missing that little bit of extra MP, and because she just has buster cards, she can't really make up for that bit of extra charge with her face cards. She also faces very harsh competition against single target arts berserkers. We have very powerful competition such as Summer Castoria, who is probably better in multi-core farming because of her targetable 20 charge and self 50 charge. We also have a more accessible option in the permanent MP upgraded Vlad III, and of course we also have a relatively cheaper 4-star option in Creamhill. So if you already have any of these servants at higher investment, then your incentive to roll for Draco is a lot smaller once again. In conclusion, Draco is a universal DPS, but a lot more polarizing than a Berserker. She has times when she's going to dominate over a Berserker because of that additional defensive class advantage, but there are also situations where she absolutely cannot deal with the boss when it is an extra class. And honestly, a lot of the times when you are using a Berserker, you are using them to counter extra classes, because you aren't always going to have a specific extra class to counter another one due to how rare they are. So they don't really occupy the exact same roles, but you know, having a very highly invested single target arts berserker will still make her feel a little bit redundant. But once again, this is not saying she is weak. I still believe she's one of the strongest servants released last year. It's just that, you know, there are situations where you can't really force to bring her out. But of course, this is a banner breakdown. We can't just end with Draco. We also got to talk about her little friend Locusta. Locusta is a limited 4-star single target arts assassin boss killer who is a very unique unit that counters poison gimmicks, because her second skill has an effect that lasts for 5 turns that turns all poison damage into heal damage, which, you know, of course is really unique and very powerful against poison gimmick bosses. Locusta is also a very good generic single target arts boss killer because she has universal anti-trait. Her MP does anti-poison damage, and it scales the more poison the enemy has on them. And of course, Locusta's skill also allows her to apply poison whenever she attacks the enemy, and you can further push that by equipping her deck with poison command codes. So give her enough time, she's going to be launching extremely powerful MPs against the enemy as long as they are not immune to dot damage. So in terms of farming, I don't think Locusta is actually that great. None of her skills are particularly great for multi-core other than her skill 3, which is a team-wide 20 MP charge, but still she doesn't have any party buffs, as well as her MP refund is quite poor, so it's very hard to make her MP even twice within one farming session. But one thing that she's good at is, of course, doing decent MP damage, albeit it's a little bit card RNG dependent because you do want to apply poison by attacking the enemy with your face cards before you MP to get that juicy MP damage. But, you know, you can just use any of her cards and you can equip her entire deck with poison command codes. As a refresher, her MP grants 15% extra anti-trait damage for each poison stack. So if you have her skill 3 activated, which applies 1 stack of poison whenever she attacks, and a poison command code, 1 card will give her 30% extra anti-trait damage, and 2 of them will give her 60% extra anti-trait damage, which is already really decent. It's already above standard anti-trait numbers, which is usually 50%. But I do think Locusta truly shines in challenge quests. She fits very well naturally into an arts team because of her team-wide 20 MP charge, as well as her triple arts deck. It allows the entire team to chain arts chains very easily and in turn spam her MP very easily despite her poor refund. Locusta, of course, give her enough time, she can stack a bunch of poison stacks on the enemy, and the anti-poison damage actually caps at a bonus 150% anti-trait damage, which is huge. Standard anti-trait damage is just 50% bonus damage, so Locusta has got an additional 100% on top of the normal anti-trait numbers. And it's not impossible to stack 10 stacks of poison on the enemy if you do have her entire deck equipped with poison command codes while her skill 3 is active. It's not that hard. Her MP, of course, also poisons, so the more she MPs, it also gives more poison. So honestly, it takes like 3 turns to get to max, which is not that hard. Locusta, of course, also auto wins against heavy poison-centric boss fights. You've probably seen funny clips of her healing 100,000 HP, which I guess you can see on screen right now as well, against the Hermit Crab advancement quest, because that entire fight is just, you know, spamming poison until you die, and she heals from those instead. A couple of things to take note of when using her in a challenge quest. First of all, if you are using her with Castoria, which in my opinion should be all the time, you can be a little bit careful with the sequencing of her skill use, because her skill 3 gives her self-poison, so she can actually use them as a heal in combination with her skill 2. So if you want to use Castoria's MP, you can always, you know, use her MP first and then use that skill 3 in order to preserve the poison stacks for her to heal. But honestly, I don't really think you have to avoid Castoria's MP just for her to keep her poison. You know, if she's not taking hits, she doesn't need to heal from the poison anyways. Another very important thing to take note of is even if you max the level of her second skill, which is the poison heal skill, it is a 5-turn duration effect with a 6-turn cooldown. So if you're not careful, there is a 1-turn gap where all of that poison is gonna turn back into normal poison. So if you are using her in a super heavy poison based boss fight, just beware that you gotta use a cooldown reduction effect, or you gotta have a cleanse on her, so when that poison heal runs out, you gotta cleanse it, or else she will die horribly from all the poison at once, which is pretty funny, but of course very tragic. So overall, I'm going to briefly list out, in my opinion, Locusta's pros and cons. So in terms of pros, Locusta, of course, is one of the most unique gimmick units in the game that heavily counters poison-based bosses. But Locusta, also because of her deck, her spread charge on her third skill, and her ability to have universal anti-trait that slowly ramps up as the fight goes on, she is just a great sort of slower arts DPS. You can even use her in neutral scenarios because of how good her anti-poison MP damage actually is. However, Locusta is of course not without cons, and the biggest con against Locusta is the existence of the evocation shop and Ryogi Shiki. This really isn't Locusta's problem, this is the problem of most 4-star non-welfare DPS units. Evocation Shop's existence makes welfares more accessible to everyone, and a lot of the times those welfares are going to be a better option than some of these more rare, especially like Locusta, limited 4 stars that you cannot get MP copies very easily, especially Ryogi Shiki being a welfare that has an MP upgrade. Her damage is very, very competitive. Locusta, unless she's like MP3, I probably would never bring her over Ryogi Shiki, of course, unless I'm against a super heavy poison-based gimmick fight. Locusta, of course, as I mentioned earlier, does need some time to get that poison damage up, so if you want more immediate damage, especially for farming and stuff, then Locusta is also not a great option. And of course, against bosses that have straight up dot immunity or debuff immunity, or even a boss that cleanses their debuff very often, Locusta is also going to lose a lot of her appeal, unfortunately. In conclusion, I'm going to give this banner a recommendation score of a 3.5 out of 5. Draco is one of the strongest universal boss killers we've seen in recent memory, and because of how many roles she can fill at once, getting her MP levels high is a really good deal. It's almost like leveling up the MP level of multiple single target boss killers all at once. And Locusta is a really unique 4-star that can still do very well against generic situations as an assassin, but excel against boss fights that heavily focuses on poison gimmicks. Now, you might ask why I only gave this banner a 3.5 out of 5. Well, it's because this banner only has DPSs, and even though Draco is super powerful, we all know that in FGO, in terms of DPS, there always are alternatives. Just like all of these single target arts berserkers I mentioned earlier when talking about Draco. And Locusta, even though I think she is super underrated and nobody talks about her enough in the community, there's always going to be Ryogi Shiki, as I mentioned before, so realistically you'll probably be using Ryogi Shiki in most cases anyways. And finally, I did reduce my recommendation point by another 0.5 because of the timing of this banner. This banner is right before summer and anniversary, and as we all know, this is when the broken stuff comes out, right? Like, we got 2 meta supports during anniversary, Koyan Light and Castoria. We got another meta support during Summer 7, which is upcoming on NA, by the way, in Summer Scotty. We also got some of the strongest DPSs in Summer Ibuki, and like last year, we didn't get a quote-unquote meta support, but we got Tonalico, which is one of the strongest multi-core DPSs in the entire game, and also the strongest AoE caster DPS in the game. And we also got Summer Castoria, who is arguably the strongest single target arts generic DPS in the game. And she will be getting a rerun before this year's summer, which will be in direct competition against Draco as well. So anyways, hope you guys enjoyed the video. This is my first time doing this format, so please let me know what I can change and do better, and I will probably do more of these, mainly I guess focusing on NA banners instead of JP banners, but yeah, look forward to that I guess, and I'll see you guys in the next one.